having worked at International House, where you have close to 80 countries and 25 states, people from 80 countries and 25 states living together, it's not an accident that over the years, hundreds of marriages across cultures have taken place. Some have worked out, some haven't. But there obviously have been many challenges in all of these cases.
I'm thinking about those couples who, we'll just say, maybe bit off more than they could chew. When they were dating, they thought, all these differences between us are lovely. I am never going to know this person fully. They are so exotic and so different that we're always going to be learning new things about each other. And I mean, just think of our future vacations going from one country to another. It's going to be so great. And then they get married. And then they start to make decisions. How are we going to celebrate Christmas? Are we going to be celebrating Chinese New Year as well as, the Western New Year? What religion are our children going to be? What language is our child going to speak? Those are things where it's really hard to compromise because you've got firm decisions on both sides, and you've got parents on both sides saying, well, okay, it was fine that you married this foreigner, but the kid has to be raised in our culture, in our beliefs. How can couples navigate that?
Well, a lot of it depends on the couple. So, for example, I was teaching a class in which we gave an option for a term paper to interview couples who came from different cultural backgrounds. How did they navigate all of those differences? So one of my students wrote a paper about a Muslim Iranian who fell in love with a Colombian Catholic. Very different religious backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds. They were just madly in love, and they broke up a few times because they were having a hard time dealing with the issues that you have just touched upon. But they are married today after 30 years. How did they do it? They said, we are going to teach our children both of our backgrounds, and we're going to have them participate in both of the areas of our religious and cultural lives. For example, the children have gone to Catholic school. They also go to Friday night Muslim prayers. They mix Latin cuisines with Persian cuisines. When it comes to the question of how are the kids going to make sense of this, right? They basically have said, we're going to leave it up to them, whether they want to lead a life of blended cultures or they want to make a choice as to whether to be primarily or predominantly Catholic or Muslim. They have succeeded because they have honored each other's traditions and values.
Welcome to yourbrilliance.com. I'm your host, Amy Waterman. And today we're talking about something that gets in the way of healthy relationships. It makes us misunderstand each other. It makes us assume the worst about each other. And sometimes it even makes us hate each other. We're talking about culture. Now, culture is tricky because our own culture tends to be invisible to us. We look at the way other people do things and we see it as wrong rather than merely different. We can't imagine why anyone wouldn't see the world the way we do. But more and more couples are having to face these issues head on. 1 in 6 new marriages are between couples of different ethnicities or races. How can these couples navigate their differences, especially when it comes to core issues like raising their children? To get some answers, we've invited Joe Lurie onto the show. Now, Joe is something of a legend. He ran the University of California, Berkeley's International House for 2 decades. These days, he's a consultant on cross-cultural communications for major companies like Google, Chevron, and American Express. His journey started back in 1967 as a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya, and he writes about those experiences in his book, Perception and Deception, now out in its 2nd edition. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start out. Why do you think cross-cultural relationships are on the rise?
Well, I think part of it has to do with technology, the relative ease of travel. A lot of it has to do with immigration, and the fact that we're living in a time of tremendous contact between people that we've never experienced before. Whether it's here, in Europe, in Asia, people are meeting people that they've never dreamed of meeting before. And so those contacts, especially when the hormones get going, often are the beginning, the catalyst for the beginning of a long-term relationship.
So that's interesting because in some ways we think of globalization as flattening out cultures, but instead what it's doing is it's actually bringing cultures together, which is nice. And I love what you said about when the hormones kick in, because one of the interesting things about different cultures is that they're often in the beginning very exotic and very appealing and very mysterious. And so no wonder we are fascinated by people from different cultures.
Yeah, and having worked at International House, where you have close to 80 countries and 25 states, people from 80 countries and 25 states living together, it's not an accident that over the years, hundreds of marriages across cultures have taken place. Some have worked out, some haven't. But there obviously have been many challenges in all of these cases.
So this is great because you've actually seen up close the beginning and possibly moving towards the end of a lot of different cross-cultural relationships from your experience. What do you think these couples, what's bringing them together and what's tearing them apart?
Well, bringing them together, of course, is the opportunity to live with people who are different and to discover their common humanity. And of course, at a certain age, the hormones facilitate that engagement. What keeps them apart, or what tends to challenge them, let us put it that way, is number one, if they decide that they want to make a lifelong commitment, where will they live if they come from different countries? What do their parents have to say about this? Oh, is my daughter going to be living in another country and not staying with us? Why isn't the husband here? And vice versa. So there's that issue. Secondly, often the couples are of different religious backgrounds. How are we going to raise our children, right? So you have religious issues, you have values issues. For example, I'll give you one example. There was a couple at International House, a German who met a woman from El Salvador. And as we know, one of the generalizations you can make about Germans in general is that they tend to be very punctual. There are always exceptions. We don't want to stereotype. I've known Germans who've been late, but nonetheless, they tend to be very punctual. And he fell in love with a woman from El Salvador. And the woman from El Salvador comes from a part of the world where people do not function on clock time. They function on event time. But he was very sensitive to this, and she to him. So they made an agreement to meet at 8 o'clock. And he, wanting to respect the sense that 8 o'clock does not mean 8 o'clock frequently in Latin America, he basically arrived at 8:30, right? Out of respect for her. She, also wanting to be respectful of him, she was ready to go at 7:45, understanding his, right? So now it's not, I don't think it's out of the question that today they happen to be married. Now that's not necessarily the reason, but it's a symptom of the fact that they were able to come to an understanding of things beyond their narratives, beyond their cultural ponds.
Wow. What I love about that is, I mean, this is something that you will see in all couples. When all couples come together, he's doesn't like a tidy house. She likes a tidy house. He wants to go out. She wants to stay in. All couples bring a lot of differences together. And usually the couples who stay together are willing to work with each other. So that kind of brings up a question. It seems like then cross-cultural relationships are just the natural differences between couples taken maybe to a bit more of an extreme, but couldn't you say to a certain extent, most couples are in some way cross-cultural? You know, maybe he comes from one state, she comes from a different state. Maybe he comes from a big city, she comes from a small town. I mean, they're all bringing differences to the table.
Right. So, for example, you and I assume we were both raised primarily in the United States, right? So we share certain things in common, but your family's culture is probably different from my family's culture. What you eat, what your preferences are, all of those things may be quite different. So yes, in every couple relationship, nobody is a ditto, I shouldn't say a ditto, a replica of the other person. So that is what is both exciting and frustrating. When it comes to cultural differences, it becomes even more challenging. Let me give you another example. In my book, I write about an American professor who married a Chinese woman. He born and raised in the United States, she born and raised in China. As you may know, as your listeners and your viewers may know, there are different conceptions of privacy in more group-oriented cultures like the Chinese in general, and more individualistic cultures like ours. We tend to optimize our sense of privacy. So for example, when this professor, American professor, goes to visit his wife's family in China, he is stunned about how much time he has to spend with them. Or when the family comes here, it's like an invasion. It's not that they stay 2 or 3 days. They might want to stay 2 or 3 months. One day, he saw his mother-in-law in China walk into his bedroom, his bedroom, and she was going through his bedroom, his underwear drawer, and he was aghast. She didn't knock. She went into the bedroom and she started to cut up a piece of some of his underwear. Why was she cutting it up? This is not your underwear. This is not your room. This is our room.
Mm.
And because I'm the grandmother, I am the grandmother of the child that you have that has plastic diapers on, which is going to make that kid have a rash. So I am going to cut up a piece of natural cloth from your underwear, and I'm going to make that kid feel more comfortable because I'm older than you. I know more than you do.
Oh, that's fabulous.
But they're still married because they understand the different. It's not that it's an absence of tension. It's an ability to work with the tensions.
That's fantastic. So what I'm thinking about, though, is I'm thinking about those couples who, we'll just say, maybe bit off more than they could chew. When they were dating, they thought, all these differences between us are lovely. I am never going to know this person fully. They are so exotic and so different that we're always going to be learning new things about each other. And I mean, just think of our future vacations going from one country to another. It's going to be so great. And then they get married. And then they start to make decisions. How are we going to celebrate Christmas? Are we going to be celebrating Chinese New Year as well as, the Western New Year? What religion are our children going to be? What language is our child going to speak? Those are things where it's really hard to compromise because you've got firm decisions on both sides, and you've got parents on both sides saying, well, okay, it was fine that you married this foreigner, but the kid has to be raised in our culture, in our beliefs. How can couples navigate that?
Well, a lot of it depends on the couple. So, for example, I was teaching a class in which we gave an option for a term paper to interview couples who came from different cultural backgrounds. How did they navigate all of those differences? So one of my students wrote a paper about a Muslim Iranian who fell in love with a Colombian Catholic. Very different religious backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds. They were just madly in love, and they broke up a few times because they were having a hard time dealing with the issues that you have just touched upon. But they are married today after 30 years. How did they do it? They said, we are going to teach our children both of our backgrounds, and we're going to have them participate in both of the areas of our religious and cultural lives. For example, the children have gone to Catholic school. They also go to Friday night Muslim prayers. They mix Latin cuisines with Persian cuisines. When it comes to the question of how are the kids going to make sense of this, right? They basically have said, we're going to leave it up to them, whether they want to lead a life of blended cultures or they want to make a choice as to whether to be primarily or predominantly Catholic or Muslim. They have succeeded because they have honored each other's traditions and values.
Wow.
Not everybody can do that.
No, not everybody can. And I'm struck by the fact that 1 in 7 babies born is multiracial. That means 1 in 7 kids, you think about how many kids in your local school, 1 in 7 of those kids is struggling with these issues at home. Who am I? Where do I belong? Who are my people? And one of the criticisms is that when you raise a child biracial, when you raise them with both cultures, that child feels torn in two. Rather than thinking, man, I've got the choice between two, I've got twice as much as everybody else, they think, I don't belong anywhere because I'm too different, I'm split in half. Do you think that these kids are going to grow up stronger and better able to create a more, sane society, or are they going to grow up with issues?
Well, I think there'll certainly be issues, but I think a lot of it depends on, do they identify with both parents equally? Has one parent had more of an influence than the other? So is it a broken marriage? Is it a fulfilled marriage? On the other hand, as well as there is, as at the same time as there are these tensions, it is also a fact that these multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial kids will perhaps be a source of building bridges for this new society that's rapidly emerging. with all of these conflicts, who are the people who are most able to understand the conflicts and to bridge them? The people who have been born up with the two sides that contribute to the conflicts.
That's right. That's fantastic. So it makes us all feel like, man, there's nothing wrong with having a multicultural family. We are the future.
Well, if you can get over the immediate tensions, and if you can feel that your parents are equally respectful of each other, yes, there is hope. But by the same token, this may take quite a while. I give you one example of why this may take quite a while. You may have noticed last year that on television, there was a United States, a U.S. American professor of Korean studies who was being interviewed about North Korea. He was living in South Korea on television. And he was during the interview in his office, all of a sudden, the door opened behind him, and you saw a little baby crawl into the room, which basically was disturbing to a certain extent, the interview. And immediately after the baby crawled into the room, the baby's sibling, older sibling, kind of toddled into the room, and a woman then ran in frantically, an Asian-looking woman, the professor was Caucasian, and grabbed the children so that the interview wouldn't be undermined any further.
Yes.
There was an explosion on social media, and the predominant conclusion was, oh, the professor has an Asian nanny.
Yes. I remember.
She was his wife. The fact of the matter is, even if you live in a cosmopolitan city, whether it's New York, San Francisco, London, etc., there are still plenty of people who find it very difficult to understand how could two people get married who come from such dramatically different backgrounds, racially, ethnically. So we have a long way to go. Yes, there are bright lights, but they're in the future, and we have to work on encouraging those lights to become brighter.
Now, you have written a book to help us do that. It's called Perception and Deception. And in fact, its second edition just came out a couple months ago. Talk to us, because this is a book full of stories. This is a book full of a lot of your personal stories of culture clash and how you learn that the way you see the world is not how other people do.
Right. And so I wrote that book because during my Peace Corps experience, I realized how much I didn't understand. I didn't understand about my own country. I didn't understand about other places and people. And so over the years, I've been collecting these stories, whether in the business world, in the educational world, in my personal world. And I just thought this is an important message for these times of polarization. And so in the second edition, I decided at the end of each chapter to put in a series of exercises to permit the reader to reflect. Well, why is it that I get so upset when my best friend comes a half an hour late and it doesn't bother them? Why is it that, Amy, for example, if I said to you, after this interview, I hope that you'll send me the tape ASAP. What does ASAP mean to you?
As soon as possible.
And what does that mean?
It means as soon as possible.
But generally speaking, as soon as possible, what does it mean for you?
It would mean that as soon as I get it, I would need to send it on to you immediately, as soon as
immediately, right?
Yeah.
As soon as possible in event time cultures where people have a much more flexible sense of time literally means as soon as possible, which might mean 3 weeks.
Wow.
And that is absolutely as legitimate as tomorrow.
Yeah. So what I'm definitely seeing is that the implications in business are huge, because as businesses go more global, I mean, anybody who's selling anything on the internet probably has international clients. A lot of cultures come into clash, and you now are working as a consultant for some of these big companies. I wondered, what is the main message you tell these huge companies like Google? What do they need to build into their systems to make sure their messages and their brand is consistent across these cultures?
Well, some of the most dramatic examples are in the world of marketing. So, for example, if you're marketing something to Malaysia, right, and you happen to have an ad with a green background, and then your product is not selling, you don't realize that green in Malaysia means sickness. You don't realize that. So the first, and Google is a very international company. We know that, right? And yet, when I go to Google and I see folks eating with people who are like each other, I ask myself, to what extent are they effectively communicating with each other? Do they understand the other person's reality? When I say to you, Amy, I have a deadline of 3 o'clock. I was doing a workshop for another company that was working with Brazilians. Now, there is no word in most languages for deadline. And when I ask some people from Latin cultures to translate the word deadline, some people will tell me, oh, hope. Hope. So what I am saying is, in these companies, yes, they're increasingly multicultural, multinational, and yes, indeed, those companies ultimately are going to become much more successful if they learn to work effectively with each other and across cultures. I could give you legions of examples of people who have failed in their marketing efforts because they didn't understand that, let's say, the number 4, the number 4 in China is equivalent to the word death.
Oh.
So you wouldn't want to give four golf balls to somebody from China or Japan. No, the message that they receive is not what you intended.
No.
And if I had to conclude all of this is, did what you intend to communicate, was it received in that way?
Fantastic. Now, for those of you out there watching, if you want to find out more, we've got a link for you. Just go to yourbrilliance.org/Joe. That's yourbrilliance.org/JOE to get a copy of Perception and Deception and to find out more about Joe's work and some of his articles on marketing. It's all there. I really urge you to check it out. Joe, thank you for coming onto the show. We're coming to an end, and I wanted to know if you had any last message you would like to leave our viewers with.
Here's a good one, because this was about relationships, right? So here in the West, it's very important, if we have affection for someone, particularly in a romantic relationship, to say, I love you. Perhaps many of your viewers don't know that in a large number of cultures, particularly in Asia, people don't say, I love you. Also parts of Africa. Why is that? Because the cultures have such a great sense of mutual and group support, there is no need to say, I love you to somebody who may be feeling insecure and need reassurance. My dentist, who is a Chinese American, has to teach her mother to say, I love you to her children, because the mother was brought up in a culture where, of course I love them. I clothe you, I feed you, I take care of you when you're sick. Actions tell you I love you. Why do I have to say I love you? I don't know, Amy, do you, when you say goodbye to people, do you say love you on the phone to people?
Absolutely.
Almost automatically?
Yeah.
Well, really. This is all about individual vulnerability in individualistic cultures, but this is a longer conversation.
Yes.
Love you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And thank you out there for watching. We hope to see you again soon. Until then, let your brilliance shine.